Chapter 2149. Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 5 quickly left Big Dipper sect and headed towards Sun Moon Palace. Sun Moon Palace had always been a rather mysterious sect. Although it was quite famous, it rarely interacted with other sections. Therefore, many people didn't know much about Sun Moon Palace. The strangest thing was that Sun Moon Palace didn't usually recruit disciples through the competition, so everyone knew even less about Sun Moon Palace. Fortunately, Mu Lingbing had come from Sun Moon Palace, so she knew a little more about it. If it weren't for Mu Lingbing, it wouldn't be easy for them to find Sun Moon Palace. After all, large sects had their own methods to protect themselves. It was impossible to discover them with the naked eye. In addition, Sun Moon Palace had deliberately disappeared from everyone's sight, so it was even more difficult to find them. Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 5 moved very discreetly. No one noticed them as they left Big Dipper sect's territory. "Mother, why has Sun Moon Palace always been so mysterious?" Bailey Hongzhuang didn't know much about Sun Moon Palace in the past. She had only heard of its name. Now that she heard everyone's discussion about Sun Moon Palace, she realized that Sun Moon Palace was actually such a mysterious sect. This level of mystery was on par with Slaughter Heaven Pavilion. Sun Moon Palace is a semi-hidden sect, so it's not the same as other sections. It rarely appears in front of the world. However, although Sun Moon Palace used to keep a low profile, it didn't appear like it did now. Mu Lingbing frowned. When she had grown up in Sun Moon Palace, it hadn't been so low-key. In her eyes, Sun Moon Palace was an extremely powerful sect. Its strength wasn't any weaker than some of the more famous sections. It was just that Sun Moon Palace was used to keeping a low profile. However, when Sun Moon Palace had participated in the competition held by the various large sects, Sun Moon Palace's strength hadn't been weak at all. Speaking of which, Sun Moon Palace suddenly became so low-key over a decade ago. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing were talking, Si Tuyen's slightly low voice suddenly sounded. When he said this, the gazes of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others changed. The 4 of them did not know much about the situation. Only Si Tuyen knew about the changes in the past 10 years. However, Si Tuyen's words were definitely not good news. If Sun Moon Palace had suddenly become low-key over a decade ago, then this timing was too much of a coincidence. If that was the case, then Mu Jinsei was really in trouble. If something happened to the Palace Lord, it would definitely be a huge problem for the sect. Once the Palace Master fell and there was no young Palace Master, the sect would fall into chaos. No one asked further. When Si Tuyen said this, it meant that even Si Tuyen was sure that these two things were related. Si Tuyen's gaze was complicated, but his face did not reveal any emotions. In the following days, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others hurried to Sun Moon Palace. If Si Tuyen was alone, his speed would definitely be extremely fast. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not keep up with Si Tuyen's speed, so they were delayed for some time. Finally, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others arrived at the Sun Moon Palace's territory after traveling without stopping. Chapter 2150. When they heard Mu Lingbing's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' eyes lit up. Along the way, the more they walked, the more deserted they became. They had thought that they would have arrived long ago, but after walking for a long time, they still could not reach their destination. Compared to the Sun Moon Palace's level of concealment, the Tiangang sect's level of concealment was nothing. If Mu Lingbing had not personally led them here, they would have been headless flies and would not have been able to find their exact location. While Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were wholeheartedly heading towards the Sun Moon Palace, the news of the Pill Master competition between the Tiangang sect and the Medicine sect had already reached the ears of many organizations. Paper cannot contain fire, and the exchange competition between the two sects could not be concealed at all. Many sects were puzzled by the Medicine sect's sudden actions. However, when they found out that the Medicine sect had been completely annihilated this time, their expressions became interesting. The medicine sect has always been known for their pill refinement skills, but now, they have been defeated by the Tiangang sect in their most prominent area. They've lost a lot of face this time. Speaking of which, the medicine sect had taken the initiative to organize this pill master competition. I heard that Gu Weisheng had even set up a trap so that Situ Yen could not refuse. I never thought that in the end, Gu Weisheng would go for wool and come home shorn. I wonder how depressed he must be now. Do you know the details of the pill master competition? The disciples of the Tiangang sect's pill refinement hall may be rather powerful, but it would be impossible for them to completely annihilate the entire pill refinement team. You don't know about this. This is all thanks to the future young sect master's wife of the Tiangang sect. There were many disciples in the Tiangang sect. Since they had been in the limelight this time, everyone could not help but spread the news. Even though most of the disciples wanted to stay in the Tiangang sect to cultivate, there were also many disciples who had left to carry out missions. As such, the news naturally spread even more widely. Besides, the medicine sect's actions had already incurred the displeasure of the Tiangang sect. Hence, the Tiangang sect would not help to cover up the news. On the contrary, the Tiangang sect wanted everyone to know about this. Putting aside the fact that Gu Weisheng had schemed against Situ Yen, he had even schemed against the disciples participating in the pill master competition. No wonder the Tiangang sect did not give him face. Because of this, the medicine sect would have to think twice before scheming against us in the future. Compared to the Tiangang sect, who was flushed with success, the medicine sect was in a very bad situation. Many organizations were paying close attention to the medicine sect's movement. Among them, those who were not on good terms with the medicine sect would naturally take advantage of this opportunity to add insult to injury. Some of the sects who were on good terms with the medicine sect could not help but ask the medicine sect about the specific situation. They wanted to know if the information they had obtained from the Tiangang sect was false. Gu Weisheng refused to see any of them. Wasn't this the same as rubbing salt on his wounds? Right now, the medicine sect was behaving like an ostrich, completely ignoring all inquiries. They could only wait for this storm to pass before appearing again. As soon as Gu Weisheng returned to the medicine sect, he announced that he would be going into closed-door cultivation. Shangguan Yufeng and the rest were equally embarrassed. When they left the medicine sect, they were determined to win. The disciples of the medicine sect were full of admiration for them and were waiting for their triumphant return. In the end, not to mention a triumphant return, they simply returned dejectedly. Chapter 2151. Under these circumstances, the reputation that Shangguan Yufeng and the rest had built up has received a huge blow. Many people began to doubt the power of Shangguan Yufeng and the rest. They were usually so arrogant in the medicine sect, yet they had been utterly defeated in the Tiangang sect. If they had known that this would happen, they would have gone on stage instead. Under these circumstances, Shangguan Yufeng and the rest were no longer able to garner their original respect. Sometimes, they would even hear some sarcastic remarks which made them extremely unhappy. However, in the face of such an outcome, it was useless for them to be unhappy because they had indeed lost. In the medicine sect's meeting hall, "Great Elder, have you found out about Bailey Hongzhuang's identity?" Gu Weisheng sat gloomily on the main seat. Even though he had announced that he was in closed-door cultivation, how could he possibly cultivate in peace under these circumstances? The medicine sect was a great sect after all. This time, they had been humiliated to such an extent. It was difficult to accept. Reporting to the sect master, "I've found out." The great elder replied to Gu Weisheng, but his expression was not very pleasant. Who is Bailey Hongzhuang? Bailey Hongzhuang had stolen the limelight in this pill master competition. If he could recruit Bailey Hongzhuang, he believes that this unfavorable situation would be turned around. Sect master, I've found out that Bailey Hongzhuang is a disciple who had been recruited by the Tiangang sect during the assessment. Hearing this, Gu Weisheng furrowed his brows in astonishment and confusion. Why would a pill master like her take part in the assessment? The medicine sect has always focused on pill masters and has not paid much attention to matters concerning cultivators. Hence, even though Gu Weisheng was aware of the existence of the assessment, he would not normally pay attention to it. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was clearly a pill master with outstanding talent. She could have entered the sect directly by taking part in the pill master assessment. Why would she take part in the assessment? It seems that Bailey Hongzhuang had been extremely lucky to have survived the assessment. Sect Master, Bailey Hongzhuang is the champion of this year's assessment. The Great Elder looked a little speechless. In fact, he did not pay much attention to the assessment competition before. He only knew that the first place of the assessment competition went to Tiangang sect. Nobody would have thought that the first place would actually be Bailey Hongzhuang. Hearing this, Gu Weisheng couldn't help but be stunned. He wondered if he had heard wrongly. Bailey Hongzhuang is the champion of the assessment? Isn't she an alchemist? Gu Weisheng had never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang had another identity besides being an alchemist. Sect Master, the information I received cannot be wrong. This Bailey Hongzhuang was the champion of the assessment competition. Moreover, after she entered the Tiangang sect, she had always stayed in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall to cultivate as a cultivator. She was a member of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Not only that, before this alchemist competition, Bailey Hongzhuang had never shown the talent of an alchemist in Tiangang sect. The Great Elder reported this specific information to Gu Weisheng. When he first saw this news, he also felt speechless. A 6th-level alchemist actually stayed in Tiangang sect as a cultivator. This was too shocking. Gu Weisheng finally understood what was going on after hearing the Great Elder's words. No wonder when Bailey Hongzhuang took part in the alchemist competition, all the disciples of Tiangang sect revealed an expression of disbelief. Chapter 2152. Do we have a way to recruit Bailey Hongzhuang? Gu Weisheng furrowed his brows and his expression was unfathomable. From the information he had gathered, he could tell that not only was Bailey Hongzhuang outstanding in her pill refining skills, her abilities were also outstanding. If her abilities were not outstanding enough, it would be impossible for her to obtain first place in the assessment competition. It seems that Bailey Hongzhuang was indeed an exceptional talent. If they could make Bailey Hongzhuang a disciple of the medicine sect, he would definitely nurture Bailey Hongzhuang well. Tiangang sect could not even figure out Bailey Hongzhuang's talents, what more nurturing Bailey Hongzhuang well? Sect leader, I'm afraid that's impossible. The Great Elder sighed. It would be great if such a talent could be used by them. Unfortunately, when he found out about Bailey Hongzhuang's other identity, he understood that it was impossible. Why? Gu Weisheng stared at the Great Elder in confusion. The Great Elder had always been a radical person. As long as there was a slight possibility, he would never give up. However, the Great Elder had now determined that it was impossible. This was simply too shocking. Sect leader, you may not know this, but Bailey Hongzhuang's other identity is Di Beichen's sweetheart. Gu Weisheng's expression changed when he heard this. This answer had far exceeded his expectations. The rumored future young sect leader's wife of Tiangang sect is Bailey Hongzhuang? Gu Weisheng had an incredulous look on his face. This was something that he had never expected. It was no wonder that the first place in this assessment competition had chosen Tiangang sect without any hesitation. It was because of this relationship. Great senior brother, do you know who Bailey Hongzhuang is? After Gu Fengyan found out about Bailey Hongzhuang, he quickly made his way to Shangguan Yufeng's residence. Ever since he had returned from Tiangang sect, Shangguan Yufeng had obviously been stimulated by Bailey Hongzhuang. He had been in seclusion to refine pills in order to improve his alchemy skills. Gu Fengyan had come to look for Shangguan Yufeng a few times, but Shangguan Yufeng had not even opened the door. After Gu Fengyan said this, He saw that the door was still closed. He sighed in his heart and prepared to leave. It seemed that great senior brother was going to be in seclusion for a long time. Just as Gu Fengyan was about to leave, the door suddenly opened. "What have you found out?" Shangguan Yufeng looked at Gu Fengyan with a burning gaze. He did not care about anything else and went straight to the point. Gu Fengyan was slightly surprised. Eldest senior brother, so this Bailey Hongzhuang is Tian Gangzong's future young lord's wife. Great senior Bailey Hongzhuang Longs was the great elder, of course, Bailey Hongzhuang's SS, Long. He was wondering how it was possible for Bailey Hongzhuang to have such powerful alchemy skills at such a young age. It turned out that she had such an identity. With so many resources from Tiangang sect, although it was still shocking that Bailey Hongzhuang could reach such a level, it made him feel better. However, Gu Fengyan's next sentence made Shangguan Yufeng's face turn ugly again. "I found out that Bailey Hongzhuang is not only an alchemist, she is even more powerful. She is the first place in this assessment competition and entered Tiangang's sect with this identity." Chapter 2153. Gu Fengyan had been extremely displeased with Bailey Hongzhuang, but after learning about her true situation, his displeasure dissipated. Instead, he began to admire Bailey Hongzhuang. It was hard not to admire a true genius. Shangguan Yufeng's face was as dark as water, and his eyes were filled with malice. A woman from the countryside had actually defeated her so thoroughly. His self-esteem and pride had been completely shattered in that moment. Mu Lingbing led everyone to Sun Moon Palace's array. In the past, she had a personal token that allowed her to enter Sun Moon Palace directly, but now she had nothing. Thus, Mu Lingbing could only shout loudly for the Sun Moon Palace disciples to come out. Before that, everyone had already reverted to their original appearances. If they had come here as strangers, Sun Moon Palace probably wouldn't have let them in. Sun Moon Palace's Mu Lingbing requests an audience with the palace master. Mu Lingbing's voice was loud and clear. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others waited quietly, hoping that the Sun Moon Palace disciples would come out. After waiting for a while, sure enough, 2 disciples appeared in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. "Who are you?" The 2 disciples dressed in Sun Moon Palace's robes sized up Bailey Hongzhuang and the others warily. Sun Moon Palace had always been extremely secretive. If one wasn't related to Sun Moon Palace, they wouldn't be able to find this place. "I am Sun Moon Palace's Mu Lingbing," Mu Lingbing said seriously. Hearing Mu Lingbing's words, the 2 disciples paused for a moment. After carefully sizing up Mu Lingbing, their expressions were still somewhat suspicious. Senior Sister Mu left Sun Moon Palace more than 20 years ago and hasn't appeared in all these years. How can you prove that you are Senior Sister Mu? These 2 disciples were very young and obviously didn't know Mu Lingbing. However, they were aware of Mu Lingbing's reputation. "I am Mu Lingbing, why do I need to prove it?" However, the 2 disciples ignored Mu Lingbing's words. Mu Lingbing looked so young. How did she look like Senior Sister Mu? Mu Lingbing felt a wave of helplessness as she watched the 2 disciples confront her. Speaking of which, she had indeed not returned for too many years, so it was normal that these disciples did not recognize her. "You can invite the Great Elder here. The Great Elder will naturally prove my identity." "Is the Great Elder someone you can meet just because you want to?" the 2 disciples said righteously. With the Great Elder's status, they wouldn't be able to see him normally. Not to mention going up to report it, they would probably be punished as well. In response, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others looked at each other. This situation really made them feel helpless. "I'll go with you and request an audience with the First Elder," Mu Lingbing said. The 2 disciples looked at each other. They also felt helpless in the current situation. If it was an ordinary person, they would have chased him away long ago. They were well aware of Senior Sister Mu's status in the Sun Moon Palace. If the other party was really Senior Sister Mu, then their actions were inappropriate. After thinking about it, this was probably the only way. Alright, you follow us. The rest of you wait here. Mu Lingbing nodded. Alright. Wait here for me. Once I confirm my identity, I'll come get you, Mu Lingbing said. Chapter 2154. Mu Lingbing followed the two disciples into the Sun Moon Palace. She couldn't help but sigh as she looked at the familiar yet slightly changed scenery. She had grown up here since she was young, so she was very familiar with everything here. However, after she had left, she had never thought that it would take so many years for her to return. Everything that had happened here seemed like yesterday. She had always thought of the Sun Moon Palace as her home. The two disciples were constantly on guard against Mu Lingbing, afraid that she wasn't the real Senior Mu. If anything happened, they wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Thankfully, they noticed that Mu Lingbing didn't do anything out of the ordinary. On the contrary, there was a look of nostalgia on her face. Very quickly, they arrived at the Sun Moon Palace. After the two disciples briefed him on Mu Lingbing's situation, they handed her over to the other disciples to inform the first elder. They were just disciples on guard duty and couldn't be away for too long. Mu Lingbing was very familiar with the rules of the Sun Moon Palace. She quietly followed behind the disciples, waiting for their report. You stay here and watch over her. I'll inform the great elder. One of the disciples turned to the disciple beside him. Mu Lingbing stood there quietly, waiting. She couldn't wait to see the first elder. She believed that the first elder would know everything that had happened all these years. When Gu Jinghe heard that Mu Lingbing wanted to see the great elder, her first reaction was that it was impossible. Mu Lingbing had disappeared for so many years and had been imprisoned in the Yu family. There was no way she could have left. However, the disciple's message was clear. Mu Lingbing wanted to see the great elder. Gu Jinghe couldn't care less about the great elder's demeanor. She rushed out of the room like a gust of wind. This was the first time that the disciple had seen the great elder so absent-minded. In the blink of an eye, the great elder had disappeared from her sight. She couldn't help but be stunned. What was going on? Mu Lingbing was waiting outside when she suddenly sensed an aura rapidly approaching. It was an aura that she was very familiar with. Lingbing, it really is you. Gu Jinghe looked at Mu Lingbing in shock. She couldn't believe her eyes. However, this stunning woman was clearly the Mu Lingbing she had watched grow up. Great elder! Mu Lingbing couldn't contain her excitement when she saw Gu Jinghe. After so many years, she was finally reunited with her family. First Elder and her master were as close as sisters. Gu Jinghe had always treated her well since they were young. In the past, when she made a mistake and was punished, it was always Gu Jinghe who protected her. Gu Jinghe had always been her family. Gu Jinghe walked up to Mu Lingbing and sized her up carefully. She couldn't help feeling suspicious. Lingbing, how did you come back? Gu Jinghe found it hard to believe. Everything that had happened was too unbelievable. Back then, they had tried to rescue Mu Lingbing, but Chen Gong had failed. Now, Mu Lingbing had returned on her own? It's a long story. The situation was far too complicated to be explained in a few words. Mu Lingbing quickly asked, First Elder, how is my master? Chapter 2155. When she heard Mu Lingbing's question, Gu Jinghe's expression turned ugly and hesitant. When she saw Gu Jinghe's expression, Mu Lingbing's heart sank. This was the outcome she didn't want to see the most. She had grown up by Mu Jin's side and didn't know that Mu Jin's was her mother. Now that she had found out, she didn't even have a chance to see Mu Jin's? Why were the heavens so cruel? They weren't even given a chance to reunite. Mu Lingbing's face turned pale. Her mother had died trying to save her, and it was all because of Yu Siqing. If she had been more careful back then, if she had discovered Yu Manlin's scheme earlier, none of this would have happened. However, she had been too foolish in the past. She had trusted the people around her, and that was why she had sunk into such a state of remorse. When Gu Jinghe saw Mu Lingbing's soulless expression, she hurriedly said, Lingbing, the situation isn't what you think. The palace lord hasn't died. Gu Jinghe's words reignited Mu Lingbing's hope, and she gripped Gu Jinghe's hand tightly. Great Elder, is what you say true? Mu Lingbing looked at Gu Jinghe with shining eyes, as if she was her last hope. As long as her master was still alive, she would have a chance to reunite. Gu Jinghe nodded. It's a long story, let's go inside first. There were many disciples coming and going, and they couldn't help but pay more attention to them when they saw them like this. When the disciples of Sun Moon Palace saw the sudden appearance of an unfamiliar face, and the appearance of the Great Elder at that, they all felt a strong sense of disbelief in their hearts. The Great Elder had always been the embodiment of dignity. When had she ever revealed such a gentle expression? Mu Lingbing naturally knew that this wasn't a good place to talk, but when she heard Gu Jinghe's words, she said, Great Elder, I didn't come alone this time. There are others waiting at the foot of the mountain. Can you let them come up first? Gu Jinghe frowned when she heard this. Sun Moon Palace had never allowed outsiders to enter. Lingbing, you should know the rules of Sun Moon Palace. First Elder, they are not outsiders. They are my family. Mu Lingbing hurriedly explained. She couldn't be more familiar with the rules of the Sun Moon Palace. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were her family, so they weren't considered outsiders. As soon as these words came out, Gu Jinghe's eyes widened a bit, revealing a bit of surprise. Then I'll go with you to pick them up. Thank you, Grand Elder. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were waiting at the foot of the mountain. They didn't know what kind of changes had happened to the Sun Moon Palace after more than 20 years. If Mu Jinsei had really fallen, Mu Lingbing didn't know if it would be dangerous for her to go up alone. While Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were worried, Mu Jinsei and another middle-aged woman appeared in front of them. Gu Jinghe clearly didn't expect there to be such a group of people at the foot of the mountain. She thought Mu Lingbing's only family was Lan Yunxiao. So who were these extra people? Gu Jinghe looked at Lan Yunxiao. She had personally attended Mu Lingbing's wedding, so she recognized Lan Yunxiao. It looked like Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao had escaped the clutches of the devil this time. Chapter 2156. Lingbing, who are they? Gu Jinghe looked at Mu Lingbing suspiciously. Great Elder, this is my daughter and son-in-law. Mu Lingbing introduced Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. As soon as these words came out, Gu Jinghe's pupils couldn't help but dilate. Her eyes were filled with deep shock. They all knew about the tragedy back then, but it was a pity that they found out about it too late. Yu Xiqing and Lan Jingquang had obviously been on guard against them, so everything had been done in secret. By the time they had found out, it was too late. They couldn't even find a trace of Mu Lingbing and the others. As for the child in swaddling clothes, they had thought that there was no way he could have survived. But they never thought that he would appear before her again. When Gu Jinghe saw the resemblance between Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing, she no longer had any doubts. She never thought that after so many years, Mu Lingbing and the others would be reunited one day. It was truly delightful. Finally, Gu Jinghe's gaze landed on Si Tuyen. She felt that Si Tuyen looked very familiar, but she couldn't recall who he was. Then, who is this? Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were Mu Lingbing's daughter and son-in-law, so this man was obviously not related to Mu Lingbing. Hearing Gu Jinghe's question, Mu Lingbing slowly said, "He is my father." These words were like a bomb that caused ripples in Gu Jinghe's heart. She looked at Si Tuyen in shock. She had thought that Si Tuyen looked very familiar, but after hearing Mu Lingbing's words, she completely understood. Si Tuyen. Wasn't this the sect leader of Tiangang's sect? However, after a short moment of shock, Gu Jinghe's gaze turned to one of disgust. What is such a heartless man doing here? Gu Jinghe and Mu Jin's were like sisters, so she naturally understood Mu Jin's situation very well. Si Tuyen, this ungrateful heartless man, had let Mu Jin's down for so many years, and now he was here to acknowledge her as his daughter. What a joke! Faced with Gu Jinghe's attitude, Si Tuyen wasn't surprised. In fact, he was indeed a heartless man. He had let Mu Jin's down for so many years, making her carry everything on her shoulders until now. He was a sinner. Get lost. Sun Moon Palace does not welcome you. Gu Jinghe's anger completely exploded. This bastard had let down Mu Jin's for her entire life. When she first met Mu Jinsei had a sad appearance. That kind of sadness spread from the bottom of her heart, making anyone who saw it couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She watched as Mu Jinsei struggled to support everything by herself. She helped Mu Jinsei deliver the child, but from the beginning to the end, she had never seen Situyen. Originally, she thought that Mu Jinsei's husband had already fallen, which was why she was so worried. However, after she found out about everything, she felt that Situyen was so trustworthy. Mu Jinsei was a beautiful woman with outstanding talent. She should have been doted on and lived a good life. However, all of this was ruined by Situyen. She had hoped that with the passage of time, Mu Jinsei would slowly get better. However, she had never forgotten Situyen. She hated Situyen, but there was still a trace of love in the depths of her heart. Chapter 2157. She had once advised Mu Jins that a heartless man like him was not worth remembering. Unfortunately, an outsider would always be an outsider. Without personally experiencing it, she would never understand the obsession in Mu Jin's heart. Watching Mu Lingbing slowly grow up and hearing Mu Lingbing complain about her biological parents abandoning her, she would see Mu Jins silently weep. Every time this happened, she would feel that Situyen was a bastard. Not to mention how amazing the sect master of Tiangang sect was. In her eyes, he was a despicable and shameless heartless man. Even after Mu Lingbing was in danger, Mu Jins was not willing to see Situyen. From this, it could be seen how much Mu Jins hated Situyen. Or perhaps, she was afraid of seeing Situyen's disdainful gaze. However, Situyen had actually appeared here now? Looking at Gu Jinghe's surging anger, Mu Lingbing hurriedly said, "First Elder, things are not what you think. Father has his own difficulties." Mu Lingbing understood that First Elder had always fought for justice for Master. Seeing Situyen's reaction now was within her expectations. What difficulties? What difficulties would make him abandon Jins? Gu Jinghe furiously said. However, after saying this, Gu Jinghe's gaze involuntarily fell on Mu Lingbing. "You already know?" Mu Lingbing slightly nodded. "Yun Xiao and I were able to escape from the Devil's Claws this time because Father and Yishuan came to save us. Otherwise, I would still be in that dungeon without seeing the light of day. First Elder, Father was deceived by you Siqing back then and did not intend to let Master down." Hearing Mu Lingbing's words, the anger in Gu Jinghe's heart did not dissipate, but at least she recovered some rationality. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other. From Gu Jinghe's angry appearance, it could be seen that she treated Mu Jins very well. Otherwise, she would not be so angry. "First Elder, let's return to the sect first and talk properly," Mu Lingbing hurriedly said. She knew that First Elder had always complained about injustice for Master all these years and could not control herself after seeing Situyen today. However, she had to find an opportunity to explain. Gu Jinghe looked at Situyen and snorted coldly. She then turned around and walked towards Sun Moon Palace. Seeing Gu Jinghe walk into Sun Moon Palace, Mu Lingbing smiled and said to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, "Let's go up first." Bailey Hongzhuang and the others followed closely behind. During this process, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not help but size up Situyen's expression. Situyen was usually the high and mighty Tiangang sect's sect master. Now that he was scolded as soon as he came here, Situyen presumably felt very uncomfortable in his heart. However, Situyen's expression remained the same. Clearly, Situyen had already thought about all of this before coming to the Sun Moon Palace, so he wasn't displeased at all. He owed Mu Jinsei for so many years, so it was normal for him to be humiliated. He had come here to apologize. Seeing Situyen like this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were relieved. This time, Situ Yan's suffering was unavoidable. However, it was still good that he had entered the Sun Moon Palace's gates. When the Sun Moon Palace's disciples saw this group of strangers suddenly enter, their eyes filled with surprise. Their Sun Moon Palace had never allowed outsiders to enter. Who were these people? Chapter 2158. Inside the hall, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others each found a place to sit down. However, Gu Jinghe's attitude was still the same as before. She looked at Si Tuyen with an unfriendly gaze. Obviously, the dissatisfaction and disgust that had accumulated over the years could not be erased in a short period of time. Gu Jinghe had already made a certain concession by allowing them to enter Sun Moon Palace. Si Tuyen naturally knew that he was not happy to be under her control and looked at, so he only sat quietly to the side and did not say anything. Now that you've all come in, you can tell me what difficulties you have. Gu Jinghe's expression was cold. She did not believe that Si Tuyen had any difficulties. What difficulties could have caused him to let Mu Jinse down for so many years? Moreover, when Mu Jinse left, she was already pregnant with his child. As long as he was a man, he would not abandon Mu Jinse at a time like this. The most shameless thing was that Si Tuyen had let Mu Jinse down because he liked Mu Jinse's good friend? What did this man take Mu Jinse for from the beginning? Si Tuyen raised his head and looked at Gu Jinghe. He had made too much of a mistake back then, but it was difficult for him to say it in front of others. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others looked at each other. They naturally knew what Si Tuyen was thinking. No matter what, Si Tuyen was the dignified sect leader of Tiangang sect. Moreover, the matter back then was so complicated. It was not appropriate to say it in front of a woman. First Elder, let me tell you about this matter. Mu Lingbing gave Gu Jinghe a look. It was most appropriate for her to tell the First Elder the whole story. Gu Jinghe saw that Si Tuyen was still trying to cover things up at this time. It was obvious that he was not sincerely remorseful, and this made her even angrier. Back then, when he abandoned his wife, he did not feel embarrassed. Now that he has to say it out loud, he feels embarrassed? Mu Lingbing walked to Gu Jinghe's side and said, First Elder, this is a long story. Let me tell you slowly. If my father is really such a person, with my personality, how could I possibly forgive him? Hearing Mu Lingbing's words, Gu Jinghe looked deeply at Mu Lingbing. Thinking of how Mu Lingbing used to be angry at her parents for abandoning her, the anger in her heart dissipated slightly. Indeed, if even Mu Lingbing could accept all of this, what else could she not accept? At Mu Lingbing's request, Gu Jinghe followed her to another room, leaving Bailey Hongzhuang and the others to wait in the hall. What Si Tuyen was concerned about right now was obviously not this, but Mu Jinse's current situation. As they were walking up the mountain, Mu Lingbing had already told them that Mu Jinse had not perished. It was precisely because of this news that everyone was somewhat patient. Even so, they still urgently wanted to know about Mu Jinse's situation. I wonder how Grandma is doing now. Bailey Hongzhuang's elegant face was filled with worry. According to what Mu Lingbing had told her, Mu Jinse's situation was not good. If this First Elder doesn't know the origin of all this, I'm afraid he won't tell us the details. Now we can only wait. Chapter 2159. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others sat there quietly, but they couldn't help but think about Mu Jinse's current situation. Inside the room, Mu Lingbing told Gu Jinghe everything that had happened. Gu Jinghe had always treated her and her master with sincerity, so it wasn't a big deal to tell Gu Jinghe about this. When Gu Jinghe learned of all this, she was also dumbfounded. Is what you're saying true? Gu Jinghe couldn't help but ask again. Mu Lingbing nodded seriously. It's true, it's all true. It wasn't just father who said this. All these years, when I was imprisoned by Yu Siqing, she told me the truth herself. From the beginning to the end, it was Yu Siqing who had been playing tricks. His father had been deceived, but he soon realized the truth. All these years, Father has been searching for Master, but he hasn't been able to find any trace of her. Gu Jinghe was stunned. This news was too shocking and she couldn't digest it. She only knew from Mu Jin's that Si Tuyen was a heartless man. He had clearly been with her, but had suddenly said cruel words to her, saying that he wanted to be with Yu Siqing. When Mu Jin's had left, Si Tuyen hadn't even tried to keep her. All these years, whenever Mu Jin's thought of Si Tuyen and Yu Siqing standing together, her heart would ache so much that she found it hard to breathe. After finding out about this, she had also paid attention to Si Tuyen's situation. She didn't know why Si Tuyen hadn't been with Yu Siqing, but she felt that they deserved it. It turned out that it was all a misunderstanding. Si Tuyen wasn't a heartless man. It was only because of Yu Siqing's machinations that they had misunderstood for so many years. If this was just Si Tuyen's one-sided story, Gu Jinghe wouldn't have believed it. But if Yu Siqing had said the same thing, then it could only be true. Gu Jinghe finally understood why Mu Lingbing had forgiven Si Tuyen. Decades had passed, but Si Tuyen had never given up on Mu Lingbing. This proved that she was equally infatuated with Si Tuyen. Mu Lingbing hadn't loved the wrong person. Si Tuyen was also true to her. It was just that he had been blinded at that time, causing them to miss out on so many years. When Gu Jinghe and Mu Lingbing returned to the meeting hall, Gu Jinghe's attitude had clearly improved. Seeing the change in Gu Jinghe's attitude, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were relieved. It seemed that Gu Jinghe also believed everything they said. Although Gu Jinghe already knew the reason for all of this, she still did not have a good attitude towards Situyen. After all, if Situyen had not made such a stupid mistake back then, it would not have led to so many tragedies. Situyen also understood this. He had never denied his mistakes, but he had made a huge mistake back then. Great Elder, can you tell us about Master's current situation now? Mu Lingbing asked the question that everyone was most concerned about. They had come back for their master. As soon as he said that, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others looked at Gu Jinghe, waiting for her answer. Chapter 2160. Gu Jinghe's words caused Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' hearts to clench. They didn't understand the true meaning behind her words. Back then, Palace Lord immediately sent people to save you when he found out what had happened to you. However, it was already too late by the time we found out. You should have told us immediately after the incident. Otherwise, the situation wouldn't have been so serious. Gu Jinghe sighed faintly. The situation that Mu Lingbing and the others encountered back then was truly a tragedy. Hearing this, Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao sighed inwardly. When that kind of thing happened back then, when they saw the dying Yi Xian in swaddling clothes, their reason had long since disappeared completely. They didn't have the heart to calm down. They only wanted Lan Jingquang and his family to pay with their blood. Who would have thought that the Lan family would choose to stand on Lan Jingquang's side? That was why they had fallen into such a state. Even though so much time had passed, everything that had happened back then was still vivid in their mind. That kind of hatred had never been extinguished in the depths of their hearts. Just thinking about it made them tremble uncontrollably. That was a blood feud. Betrayal. Pursuit. Despair. That was a pain that went deep into their bones. Even in death, they weren't willing to forget it. It was because of this extreme hatred that they never thought of giving up in the face of endless torment. Because they couldn't forget. If it happened again, they probably wouldn't be able to stop themselves from doing it again. Because no one else would understand the feeling of seeing their own child lying in a pool of blood. Gu Jinghe saw the change in Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao's expressions and understood that under such circumstances, they wouldn't have thought so much. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but feel emotional. Even though she didn't have any memories of her childhood, she could still imagine how tragic that scene had been. Her rationality had long dissipated. Gu Jinghe sighed faintly and didn't continue on this matter. After we found out about the situation, we went to look for you, but there was no news at all. We went to the Lan family, but the Lan family's elders' attitude was the same as before. This matter was a kind of humiliation to them, so they weren't willing to talk about it. After that, the palace lord never gave up looking for your whereabouts, but there was too little information left behind at that time, and there were people who erased all traces along the way. Therefore, even though we tried our best to search for him, there was still no news. A long time later, when the palace master found out that Yu Manlan and Yu Siqing were very close, she seemed to have thought of many things in an instant and went directly to the Yu family. At that time, I didn't know what had happened, and the palace lord had gone there alone. However, when the palace master returned, she was already heavily injured. Gu Jinghe couldn't help but recall the scenes from back then. Even though many years had passed, she still remembered them clearly. When the palace lord returned, his face was green. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. Moreover, there was an indescribable despair on her face. No matter how I asked, she didn't tell me anything. Chapter 2161. Hearing Gu Jinghe's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others couldn't help but look at each other. It seemed that the situation was exactly as they had thought. Yu Siqing had poisoned Mu Jinsei. Based on Yu Siqing's hatred for Mu Jinsei, the poison she had used must have been extremely powerful. Curing the poison would not be easy. Bailey Hongzhuang had already understood how powerful Yu Siqing's poison skills were. She could cure it, but others might not be able to. This was because her own medical and poison skills were not something an ordinary person could compare to. What happened after that? Si Tuyen couldn't help but ask. With Yu Siqing's viciousness, he could almost imagine what Mu Jinsei had encountered after going to the Yu clan. Yu Siqing had long fallen into madness and hated Mu Jinsei to the bone. Mu Jinsei had not understood the truth of the matter after so many years. Presumably, Yu Siqing's words had pierced Mu Jinsei's heart again and again. Just thinking about this made him want to tear Yu Siqing into pieces. Gu Jinghe couldn't help but look at Si Tuyen and continued, the poison was too powerful. We had already thought of many ways, but there was no way to cure the palace master. The Yu clan had the best medical skills in the entire Saint Xian continent. However, the Yu clan obviously wouldn't lend a helping hand, so we couldn't do anything. The doctors had used all their skills, but could only save the palace master's life. After that, the palace master went into closed-door cultivation. After so many years, I haven't seen the palace master again. Following Gu Jinghe's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' expressions became complicated. Great Elder, since you haven't seen the palace master for so many years, how can you be sure that the palace master is still alive? Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were filled with doubt and worry. Mu Jinsei's injuries had been so serious and they hadn't seen her for so many years. No one knew how she was doing now. We have the palace guardian lantern. The lantern has always been lit, proving that she's still alive. If the lantern is extinguished, then she's fallen. The palace master's palace guardian lantern has always been lit. Although it had looked like it was on the verge of collapse, it had stabilized. It's because of this that I can be sure that the palace master is fine. Gu Jinghe said. As soon as this was said, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others felt relieved. As long as Mu Jinsei was still alive, it was good news. First Elder, have you not gone to see Master all these years? Since Master is still alive, why hasn't he appeared for so long? Mu Lingbing couldn't figure it out. This was too strange. She couldn't figure it out at all. Gu Jinghe looked at Mu Lingbing with a complicated expression. Palace Lord, the Palace Lord, has been disfigured. The pupils of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others instantly widened, and there was a thick color of disbelief in their eyes. Being disfigured was something that no woman could bear. Moreover, Mu Jins was a devastatingly beautiful woman, yet she was disfigured. However, thinking about it carefully, Yu Siqing had been jealous of Mu Jinsei for so many years. She could think of all kinds of vicious method. This kind of method was really in line with her personality. Si Tuyan's hands couldn't help but tremble. He couldn't imagine how Mu Jinsei would be able to endure all this. All of this was his fault. At this moment, Si Tu Yen hated that he couldn't kill himself. If he hadn't cared so much at that time and killed Yu Siqing at the first opportunity, how could so many things have happened? Chapter 2162. The atmosphere in the discussion hall grew heavy, and everyone's emotions were complicated. Mu Jin's had suffered too much in this period of history. Mu Jin's and Bailey Hongzhuang's expressions were equally ugly. An ordinary woman wouldn't be able to bear such a thing. First Elder, if I'm not wrong, the poison in the palace master's body shouldn't be as simple as disfiguring her face, right? Although it was just a guess, Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was filled with certainty. As soon as this was said, the eyes of Di Beichen and the others fell on the body of Bailey Hongzhuang. They did not know how Bailey Hongzhuang came to this conclusion. Gu Jinghe looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a complicated expression. She hadn't expected Bailey Hongzhuang to be so intelligent. That's right. Gu Jinghe nodded. What other questions do you have? Mu Lingbing quickly asked. The palace master's condition is extremely bad. She can't move at all. All these years, I haven't seen the palace master, so I don't know the exact situation. Gu Jinghe was deeply worried. She had always been worried about the palace master's condition. All these years, she had tried many times to see the palace master, but the palace master had never responded. In this regard, she could only continue to wait. After hearing Gu Jinghe's answer, Bailey Hongzhuang also nodded. This was the only situation that made sense. Based on how much Mu Jin's cared for Mu Lingbing, even if her face was disfigured, it would only be a temporary blow to her. After she recovered from this blow, she would definitely not let it go like this. However, if Mu Jin's could no longer move, then everything would make sense. Mu Lingbing's face drained of all color. She had never imagined that her master had suffered so much. Si Tu Yan's expression was also extremely ugly. Mu Lingbing had been so beautiful in the past. Her every frown and smile was enough to mess with people's hearts. But now, Mu Lingbing had been reduced to such a state. All these years, she had been alone. What kind of pain was that? But he didn't know anything. Gu Jinghe's gaze landed on Si Tu Yan. The current Mu Jin's was no longer the Mu Jin's of the past. He didn't know if Si Tu Yan would still want to see Mu Jinsei after knowing all this. Where is she? I want to see her. At this moment, Si Tu Yan could no longer hold himself back. He wanted to see Mu Jinsei. He wanted to confess to Mu Jinsei. He had to make up for it. All these mistakes were caused by him. He thought that what he had suffered all these years was pain, but compared to this, it was nothing. The palace lord is already disfigured. Why do you still want to see her? Gu Jinghe stared at Si Tu Yan. The palace lord had already endured extreme pain all these years. If Si Tu Yan were to hurt the palace lord again at this time, the palace lord would definitely not be able to bear it. I don't care. Si Tu Yan answered without hesitation. He didn't care. He didn't care what Mu Jinsei looked like. As long as she was Mu Jinsei, then she would be the only woman he, Si Tu Yan, had ever loved. He was the one who came too late. He had let Mu Jinsei bear so much alone. But now, he was here. He only wanted to stay by Mu Jinsei's side and spend the rest of his life with her. Where is she? Quickly take me to see her. Si Tu Yan seemed to be possessed as he stared at Gu Jinghe. Chapter 2163. She suddenly understood that Mu Jinsei had not misjudged him from the start. Si Tu Yan was not an ungrateful man, nor was he a heartless man. At this time, Si Tu Yan's true feelings were not fake. I'll take you to see the palace lord, but I think it's better for Ling Bing to see her first. Don't appear first. I think the palace lord has become like this because she doesn't want to see you the most. Gu Jinghe looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, her voice filled with concern and seriousness. As a woman herself, she understood a woman's feelings very well. The palace lord had always been a proud daughter of the heavens. She only wished to appear in front of Si-Tu Yen in her best appearance, and not in her current ugly state. Following Gu Jinghe's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others thought for a moment and understood Gu Jinghe's meaning. Although Gu Jinghe had always been dissatisfied with Si-Tu Yen, her dissatisfaction had dissipated a lot after knowing the origin of all these grievances. The reason why she had said such words now was completely from Mu Jinsei's point of view. Si-Tu Yan's expression was somewhat anxious. He had been searching for Mu Jinsei for over 40 years. For so many years, he had relied on the memories of their past together to get by. He really wanted to see Mu Jinsei. No matter what Mu Jinsei looked like now, even if she was unbearably ugly, even if she couldn't move, as long as she was still alive, it was the most fortunate thing for Si-Tu Yen. In the past, he had been stunned by Mu Jinsei's beauty. However, after so many years, the one he loved was no longer those, but only Mu Jinsei herself. Di Baichen pulled Si-Tu Yen and said, "Master, I'll wait here with you. Since we're already here, there's no need to be anxious." Si-Tu Yen had wanted to say something, but after hearing Di Baichen's words, he only sighed and nodded. That's right, after waiting for so many years, he really shouldn't be too anxious. If he ended up scaring Mu Jinsei, that was something he didn't want to see. Bailey Hongzhuang and Lan Yunxiao were also sitting in the discussion hall. It was better for Mu Lingbing and Gu Jinghe to communicate with Mu Jins first. Just as Gu Jinghe and Mu Lingbing were about to leave, Mu Lingbing called for Bailey Hongzhuang. No matter what, Bailey Hongzhuang was Mu Jins's granddaughter. Back then, Mu Jins had met Bailey Hongzhuang. At that time, Mu Jins was extremely affectionate. Mu Lingbing had always felt that her master treated her well, so she liked Bailey Hongzhuang very much. Only now did she understand. So, it was kinship. Seeing Mu Lingbing's actions, Gu Jinghe didn't object. She believed that if Mu Jinsei knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was still alive, she would be extremely happy. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two left the discussion hall together, leaving behind the three men to continue waiting. First Elder, Master has sealed herself away all these years. When you spoke to her, did she respond to you? Mu Lingbing's hands were tightly clasped together as she couldn't help but worry. No one had seen her master for so many years, so she didn't know if her master's current situation was very bad. Palace Lord would respond to me sometimes, but she clearly didn't want to say much. She only told me to properly manage Sun Moon Palace. Chapter 2164. Bailey Hongzhuang silently listened to Mu Lingbing and Gu Jinghe's conversation. So many years of loneliness must have been unbearable. Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao had been tortured by Yu Siqing all these years, while Mu Jins had been tortured by herself. In the past, she had never imagined that her grandmother would live such a tragic life. Gu Jinghe's gaze landed on Bailey Hongzhuang. Even now, she still found it inconceivable. At that time, almost everyone was certain that Bailey Hongzhuang would die without a doubt. Who would have thought that not only did Bailey Hongzhuang survive, but she had also grown into such an outstanding person. Yixuan, I never thought that I would have the chance to see you again. Gu Jinghe couldn't help but sigh, her joy evident in her words. Mu Lingbing's group had brought so much good news with them today. When Mu Lingbing had given birth to Bailey Hongzhuang, she had accompanied Mu Jins to the Lan family to congratulate them. The young Lan Yixuan had been extremely adorable. When she found out what had happened to Lan Yixuan, she had been furious. Now that she could see her again, it was truly a blessing from the heavens. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. Such a change, she was afraid that nobody would have thought of it. Everything is fated. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Gu Jinghe's eyes were deep as she nodded. That's right, everything is fated. No one would have thought that your family would see the light of day again. I believe that the Palace Lord will get better. Gu Jinghe clenched her fists. They had already suffered so much. She believed that the heavens wouldn't be so cruel. Not long after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others arrived at Mu Jins's quarters. Mu Lingbing looked at the familiar quarters and her eyes reddened. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. It's been so many years, but everything is still the same. The palace lord's quarters had always been off-limits to disciples. However, she had lived here since she was young and was very familiar with everything. During the days when she had been imprisoned and tortured by Usiching, she would often dream of everything here. The palace lord is in the quarters. Go ahead. I believe that the palace lord will be very happy to know that you're here. Gu Jinghe's eyes were also red. After waiting for so many years, they had finally come back. As an outsider, she should leave it to them. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing looked at each other, and then walked together to the door of the palace. Master, I'm back. Mu Lingbing looked at the mahogany door, and said only one sentence, but her tears were already flowing. She had missed everything. She had missed everything here. As soon as she came here, she couldn't hold back the tears in her eyes. After she said the words that she had wanted to say for more than 10 years, she finally burst into tears. Master, I'm back. You're Bing, I'm back. Mu Lingbing's tears fell uncontrollably. I came back too late. I found out too late. Mother, I. Pata. The sound of a teacup shattering rang out. The owner of the teacup had been too shocked and had accidentally broken it. Bailey Hongzhuang sat next to Mu Lingbing. As she looked at the sobbing Mu Lingbing, she couldn't control her emotions. Chapter 2165. Mu Lingbing called out, Mother, very naturally. In her heart, she had already said it thousands of times. Ever since she was a child, she had always treated her master as her mother. It was just that she had never dared to say it out loud. Now, she had finally said it out loud. Bing, is it really you? A hoarse and dry voice rang out. It was obvious that the other party had not spoken for a long time, and her voice had an indescribable dryness to it. However, this simple sentence was filled with uncontrollable excitement. It's me. I'm back. Mu Lingbing nodded frantically, even though Mu Jins couldn't see. That's great, you're back. Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing heard the sound of shuffling coming from the bedroom. It looked like Gu Jinghe was right. Mu Jins really couldn't walk. Just as Mu Lingbing and Mu Lingbing sensed that Mu Jins was getting closer and closer to the bedroom door, Mu Jins suddenly stopped. Bing, who are you with? Mu Jins had been too excited by Mu Lingbing's appearance and hadn't noticed anything else. However, as she neared, she sensed that there was someone else beside Mu Lingbing. Grandmother, I'm Yi Xian. I'm here too. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes sparkled. Although she had never seen Mu Jins before, she was also filled with longing. All these years, Mu Jins had suffered too much, and they had only just found out about it. Mu Jins was stunned for a moment at these words. Then she said in disbelief, Yi Xian? Is it really Yi Xian? You're still alive? Mu Jins felt that this was too unbelievable. Lan Yixuan's dantian had been forcefully destroyed and the rainbow pearl taken out. No one had been able to heal her after that. How could Lan Yixuan still be alive? Grandmother, I'm blessed with good fortune and won't be harmed so easily. I'm afraid. Lan Jingquang and the rest wouldn't have thought that I'm still alive. Her inky black phoenix eyes flashed with a sinister light. Before she had appeared, everyone must have thought that Lan Yixuan was already a dead person. However, things weren't that simple. Karma and retribution, everything will be returned. Mother, this time, Yun Xiao and I were able to escape from Usiching's control because Hong Zhuang saved us. Mu Lingbing hurriedly said. You? What did you call me? Even though Mu Lingbing had already called her once, Mu Jinsei had been too anxious to ask. She couldn't help but ask when she heard how Mu Lingbing addressed her. Mother, I already know all of this. It turned out that the master who raised me was my mother. It's a pity that I didn't know about it before. You must be heartbroken. Tears streamed down Mu Lingbing's face as she spoke. She had felt the same way when she first learned about this from Usiching. The bedchamber was completely silent. Mu Jinsei clearly hadn't thought of how to face all of this, so she could only stare in a daze. In fact, the people in the hall were already in tears. She thought that she would keep this secret for the rest of her life. Even if he couldn't reunite with Mu Lingbing in this lifetime, it was enough that he was her closest master. Chapter 2166. Seeing that there was no movement in the bedchamber, Mu Lingbing couldn't help but ask, "Mother, can you open the door to the bedchamber?" She hadn't seen Mu Jin's for a long time. She really wanted to see her and not talk to her through the door of the bedchamber. Bailey Hongzhuang quietly sat to the side and didn't say much. The most important thing was for Mu Lingbing and Mu Jin's to recognize each other. Bing Yixuan, the current me is no longer the previous me. Mu Jin's voice was filled with bitterness. Let me always remain in your memories. Don't ever see me again. Mu Jin's leaned against the door of the bedchamber as tears continuously flowed. She really wanted to take a good look at Bing and see the grown-up Yixuan. But with her current appearance that was neither human nor ghost, how could they recognize each other? Rather than letting them see her neither human nor ghost, it was better not to see them. Mother, First Elder has already told us about your situation. It doesn't matter. We'll think of a way together and we'll definitely successfully cure you. Grandmother, my medical skills are very good. Believe me, I'll definitely help you recover. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was sincere. She knew that Yu Siqing must have used the most vicious poison on Mu Jin's, but she was also confident in her medical skills. Mother, Yixuan is a godly doctor. These years, Yu Siqing has used many poisons on me and Yun Xiao, and it was Yixuan who detoxified them. You don't have to worry, everything will be fine. Even if we can't cure you, you're still our closest relative. Mu Lingbing pressed her hands against the door of the bedchamber. No matter what Mu Jin's became, she would always be the person who took care of her, loved her, and accompanied her since she was young. After hearing Mu Lingbing's words, Mu Jin's tears had already overflowed. These years, when she looked at her ugly self in the mirror, it was so disgusting that she couldn't face it. She was really afraid that if others saw her current appearance, they wouldn't be able to bear it. Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing looked at each other. It seemed that the situation was more serious than they thought. Based on Mu Jin's situation, she would definitely want to see them. However, the fact that Mu Jin's did not open the door despite her current state of mind meant that she was afraid. What had she become that she didn't even have the courage to see them? Mother, let us take a look at you. I know that you became like this because of me. If you don't want to see me, then I can't face myself. If I wasn't useless, you wouldn't have become like this. It was my stupidity that allowed the wicked to find the opportunity to make you and Yixuan suffer so much. Mu Lingbing slammed her forehead against the door. She had been filled with regret for far too long. Ever since she found out about Mu Jin's situation, she found it even harder to forgive herself. In fact, she couldn't take it anymore. Because of her ignorance, her arrogance, and her carelessness, she had made such a mistake. She suddenly felt that she deserved all the torture she had endured for so many years because it was all because of her negligence. However, Mu Jin's and Bailey Hongzhuang had suffered so much because of her. Bing This has nothing to do with you. Chapter 2167. If I'm wrong, then I'm the cause of all these mistakes. If I had seen through Yu Siqing's character earlier and not become friends with her, then perhaps this wouldn't have happened. The worst thing was that I shouldn't have fallen for a heartless man. All of this blame is because of him. Mu Jin's clenched her fists tightly. All these years, she couldn't help but feel regret. Because of her relationship with Situan, Mu Lingbing and Lan Yixuan had to endure all this. She'd been wrong, very wrong. When she was young, she'd thought that she was a proud daughter of the heavens. Even if her status was low, with her talent, she'd still be able to become one of the best. But now, it seemed that everything was a big mistake. Hearing Mu Jin's accusations, it was clear that she didn't know all this. Mu Lingbing immediately prepared to explain to Mu Jin. Just as Mu Lingbing was about to explain, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but stop her. The most important thing now was for Mu Jin's to be willing to come out of the bedroom. There was no need to rush any other explanations. After all, Mu Jin's had been immersed in this thought for so many years. If Mu Lingbing mentioned Si Tuyen now, Mu Jin's would immediately reject it. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, Mu Lingbing didn't understand at first, but she quickly reacted. "Mother, just let us meet. We've already been separated for so many years, don't you want to see Yixuan when she grows up?" Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing had been trying to get Mu Jin's to open the door to the bedroom. There was a restriction on the door, and if Mu Jin's didn't open it, they wouldn't be able to enter. Under Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing's continuous efforts, Mu Jin's finally opened the door to the bedroom. Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing looked at the purple-robed woman in front of them. Her face was covered by a veil, and her entire body was covered tightly. Thus, they could only see Mu Jin's figure and couldn't see anything else. Mother, Mu Lingbing's face lit up with joy. Even though she only saw this figure, she could recognize that this was the master who had raised her all this time. When Mu Jin saw Mu Lingbing with her own eyes, her hands couldn't help but tremble. She'd thought that she'd never see Mu Lingbing again in this lifetime. Who would have thought? The heavens had given her this chance. "Bing-er, I've finally met you. You are still the same as before. You haven't changed at all." Mu Jinsei looked at Mu Lingbing's familiar face. It was exactly the same as when Mu Lingbing had gotten married. Yes, Mu Lingbing, Mu Lingbing's right. She had deliberately said this in hopes that Mu Jinsei would not despair because of her disfigurement. "They'll find a way, Mu Jin's of mu tss mu teat have test / teat Yixuan, it's Yixuan." Even though this was the first time she'd seen Bailey Hongzhuang in so many years, Mu Jin's could still recognize her at a glance. That silhouette, it was clearly the combination of Mu Lingbing and Lan Yunxiao. Chapter 2168. Mu Jinsei didn't walk out of the bedroom, but let Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing enter before closing the door behind them. It wasn't suitable for her to go out now. "Bing-er Yixian, tell me how you've been all these years." As she spoke, Mu Jinsei covered her face with her veil, unwilling to let Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing see even half of her face. From Mu Jinsei's cautious manner, it was clear that she was extremely concerned about this situation. She wanted to see Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang too much, so she was willing to open the door to the bedroom. However, in her heart, she still refused to let anyone see her current appearance. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing weren't in a hurry. Since Mu Jinsei was willing to see them now, then she would definitely let them know the truth of the situation. Mu Lingbing clearly didn't have much to say about what had happened all these years. She had been imprisoned by Yu Siqing all these years and had suffered all sorts of pain and torment. Now that all this suffering had ended, she didn't want to think about it anymore. However, there were times when she would still dream about the nightmarish past. Yu Siqing's sinister and crazed face had caused her body to turn cold, and all sorts of strange poisons had caused her to be terrified. She understood that it was because all of this had haunted her for so many years that she couldn't forget it. However, she believed that after a certain amount of time, all of this would become a thing of the past. Mu Lingbing clearly wasn't willing to talk about all of this. Saying it now would only cause Mu Jinsei and Bailey Hongzhuang to feel even more upset. Hence, Mu Jinsei and Mu Lingbing focused their attention on Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang gave a brief account of her experiences all these years, but she didn't mention all the humiliation and suffering she had endured. The three of them had suffered all these years, and it was enough for her to bear this kind of experience. The heavens have really blessed us. Fortunately, you survived and have become so outstanding. The heavens didn't take away all of our hope. Mu Jinsei couldn't help but sigh. When she found out about what Bailey Hongzhuang had gone through, she was also heartbroken. She had thought that they would never meet again in this lifetime. She even thought that she would never be able to face Bailey Hongzhuang even in the underworld. He never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would be so strong and survive. Grandma, God hasn't cut off our hope. Although we've suffered a lot over the years, it's finally over. After that, we will return all the pain to the Yu clan and the Lan clan. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a ruthless light. They had wasted decades of their lives, especially Mu Jinsei. Yu Siqing had almost ruined her life. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Mu Jinsei couldn't help but be taken aback. Her eyes flashed with astonishment. This light was fleeting, but it quickly turned into determination and viciousness. That's right. They had suffered so many years of humiliation for no reason at all. It was fine that the grudge between her and Mu Jinsei had developed to this point, but why did her daughter and granddaughter have to be immersed in such a conspiracy? She couldn't accept this. She couldn't bear all of this so easily. In the past, she felt that without Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang, all of this was meaningless. Chapter 2169. Mu Jin's gaze landed on Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang before revealing a helpless expression. Lingbing, Yishuan, this enmity must be avenged. But I'm afraid I can't do anything in my current state. Mu Jin's gaze fell on her hands. She was no different from a cripple now. Revenge. She couldn't do it. At least, she couldn't do it personally. After learning of Yu Siqing's actions, her hatred had reached its peak. This sinister and vicious woman had ruined her entire life. She wanted to kill Yu Siqing with her own hands almost every day. But what could she do now? However, the Sun Moon Palace's forces can be given to you. Mu Jin's eyes flashed with hatred. She couldn't do this in the past, but now that Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang were here, it was possible. Although the Sun Moon Palace rarely appeared in the eyes of the world, its strength wasn't weak. It was even stronger than some famous sections. Hearing Mu Jin's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing looked at each other. It seemed like Mu Jin's hatred was even stronger than theirs. Just from Mu Jinsei's eyes they could see all of this. It's not just the Yu family, there's also the Lan family. Back then, I saw their sincerity and Lan Yunxiao was the next head of the Lan family, so I agreed to let you be together. But, the Lan family actually dared to treat you like this. Hate. Mu Jin's had hated for so many years. Ever since she became an ugly cripple, she had locked herself in her bedroom and relied on this surging hatred to survive until now. In the past, she, Mu Jinsei, had never known what hatred was. No matter what she encountered, she could always face it indifferently. She only felt that hate was an unnecessary emotion. But after returning from the Yu family, only hatred remained in her heart. She missed her daughter and granddaughter, hated Yu Siqing, hated that man, and hated herself most of all. She never thought that after Lan Jingquang's family did such a despicable thing, not only did the Lan family not seek justice for Lan Yunxiao and Mu Lingbing, they even protected them. This was intolerable. Mother, this enmity. We will definitely take revenge. But you must come personally and watch us take Yu Siqing's dog life. Mu Lingbing tightly grasped Mu Jin's hand. She could feel the intense hatred in her mother's heart. Mu Jin must see this scene with her own eyes. Only then would she be able to truly let go of everything. Just as Mu Lingbing was about to grab Mu Jinsei's hand, Mu Lingbing suddenly trembled and hurriedly pulled her hand back. But at this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang saw Mu Jin's hand, and her eyes narrowed. Mu Jinsei's hand was black. It didn't look like a person's hand, but more like a piece of charcoal. How was this possible? Bailey Hongzhuang was shocked. Could it be that Mu Jin's was poisoned so deeply that her whole body had turned black? But if the poison was really that strong, then Mu Jinsei should have died long ago. However, Mu Jin's was clearly alive and well. She could even feel that Mu Jin's aura was very strong. Chapter 2170. Night slowly fell. Situ Yan's group of 3 had been waiting in the discussion hall, but they still hadn't seen Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang return. At this moment, Gu Jinghe walked into the discussion hall. Lingbing and Yishuan are both in the palace master's sleeping quarters. I don't know how long they'll be talking. I've already prepared a place for you to stay, Gu Jinghe said slowly. When she saw Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang enter the sleeping quarters, she relaxed. After waiting outside for a while, she noticed that Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang didn't show any signs of coming out, so she came to inform Situ Yan's group. Mu Jin's and the other 2 hadn't seen each other for so many years, so they must have a lot to talk about. A few days and nights wouldn't be enough. She believed that the palace master's mood would improve after seeing Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang. If Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang were capable enough, she really hoped that the palace master could come out of the sleeping quarters. In these 10 years, the palace master had been sealed up by herself, so she must be in great pain. Hearing Gu Jinghe's reply, Situ Yan hurriedly stood up. His expression was somewhat anxious. You're saying that Lingbing and the others have already seen Mu Jin's? Gu Jinghe glanced at Situ Yan indifferently, then nodded. They've already gone in to chat for a while, but we don't know when they'll come out. After receiving Gu Jinghe's confirmation, Situ Yan, Lan Yunxiao, and Di Beichen all couldn't help but sigh in relief. As long as they successfully saw Mu Jin's, it would be an extremely good result. No matter how long they had to wait here, they didn't mind. They believed that with Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing's persuasion, everything would be easily resolved. Under Gu Jinghe's guidance, the 3 of them arrived at the living quarters she had prepared for them. You can rest here. When Lingbing and the others come out, we'll bring them over. If you need anything, you can tell the servant girls. After saying all this, Gu Jinghe saw that Situ Yan and the other 2 did not need anything else, so she turned around and left. She believed that Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't stay in the bedroom for the entire night. They would probably come out soon. Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing had been telling Mu Jinsei about what had happened in the past few years, including the fact that Bailey Hongzhuang already had a sweetheart. However, they never mentioned Di Beichen's name and identity. With the relationship between Mu Jinsei and Situ Yan, she must have been extremely concerned about Heavenly Dipper sect all these years. As the young master of Tiangang sect, Di Beichen's reputation was naturally very resounding. Once Mu Jinsei found out, they were very worried that Mu Jinsei's emotions would fluctuate. While they were chatting, Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing also tried to persuade Mu Jinsei to let Bailey Hongzhuang treat her. However, Mu Jinsei was extremely resistant. Every time Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing brought up this point, she would remain silent. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing didn't force her. It was obvious that Mu Jinsei had closed herself off for so long that many of her thoughts were already deeply rooted. If they wanted Mu Jinsei to let go of everything, it wouldn't be an easy task. However, since they were already here, they had plenty of time. Chapter 2171. When Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing walked out of the bedroom, the sky was already filled with stars. The 2 of them had faint smiles on their faces, but the worry in the depths of their eyes had not dissipated. Yishuan, your grandmother has been unwilling to seek treatment. What should we do? Mu Lingbing was now full of confidence in Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills. She believed that Bailey Hongzhuang would definitely be able to cure Mu Jin's. Unfortunately, Mu Jin's was unwilling to accept treatment. She didn't understand what Mu Jin's was thinking. Mother, we can't rush this. Back then, grandmother would have been able to cure herself, but the doctors were helpless. At that time, grandmother had been disappointed too many times, so she doesn't want to be disappointed again. We just need to slowly open grandmother's heart. She will definitely accept it. As a doctor, Bailey Hongzhuang was very familiar with a patient's condition. She wasn't willing to try because she didn't want to be disappointed again. Actually, from a doctor's point of view, since she had been disappointed so many times, she shouldn't be afraid of being disappointed again, because after trying, there would at least be a glimmer of hope. However, her grandmother's condition was more serious than those who were afraid of treatment because her condition was too serious. Moreover, it was the person she hated the most who had caused her to become like this. She believed that her grandmother would rather lose to anyone in this world than to Yu Siqing. However, in this matter, she had lost to Yu Siqing. So, the more she tried, the more she failed. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Mu Lingbing's expression changed and she nodded. "You're right, I was too anxious." Mu Lingbing was vexed. She had been too anxious, because she had suffered for so many years, and now that she had finally recovered, she hoped that Mu Jin's would be able to recover from this pain as soon as possible. However, she didn't consider that Mu Jin's situation was different from hers. Her actions were only making things difficult for Mu Jin's. "Mother, you're being too concerned." Bailey Hongzhuang comforted Mu Lingbing. Right now, they both hoped that the other would recover quickly. However, this all depended on grandmother to walk out of this. When Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing arrived, they discovered that Si Tuyen, Lan Yunxiao, and Di Beichen were all awake. The moment they saw them return, the three men walked out of the house almost at the same time. Their eyes were fixed on them. Si Tuyen quickly walked over to Bailey Hongzhuang and asked, "How is Jinsei now?" "Her injuries are very serious, but Grandma didn't want us to know, so I can only make a rough guess. I can't be sure of the real situation," Bailey Hongzhuang said frankly. She knew that her grandfather was definitely the one who cared about her the most, so there was no need to hide these things. Mu Lingbing then told everyone everything that had happened after they entered the sleeping chamber. Si Tuyen fell silent for a long time after he heard everything. "It seems that mother-in-law's injuries are more serious than we thought." Lan Yunxiao furrowed his brows. He originally thought that only Mu Jin's face was disfigured, but now it seemed that her entire body was affected. Chapter 2172. After seeing Mu Jin's condition, Bailey Hongzhuang had been thinking about what kind of poison could cause Mu Jin to become like this. However, there was no such poison in her memories. For a woman, turning every part of her body into such a state was no different from the cruelest punishment. Bailey Hongzhuang could understand Mu Jin. She was once a proud daughter of the heavens, but now she had become like this. She must have found it hard to accept and was even more unwilling to be seen by the people she cared about. After thinking for a long time, Bailey Hongzhuang still couldn't think of the relevant poison. Only if Mu Jin was willing to examine her would she be able to find the root of the problem. Si Tuyen and the rest all knew of Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills. After hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's judgment, their hearts sank even more. "This Yu Siqing is simply inhuman." Di Beichen's handsome face couldn't hide his anger. When he found out about this from Gu Jinghe, he was already extremely angry. He didn't expect the situation to be even more serious than he imagined. It was no wonder Mu Jin had sealed herself away for so many years. If it was only her face that was disfigured, she could still wear a veil in front of others. If her entire body became like that, then she really wouldn't know how to face others. "Yixuan, do you have the confidence to cure grandmother?" Lan Yunxiao looked towards Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills were much stronger than ordinary doctors. He could only place all his hopes on Bailey Hongzhuang. "I don't understand the situation right now, so I can't make a judgment. However, I will definitely find a way to save her." Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flickered with a resolute light. She had always had an extraordinary talent in medical skills. No matter what method she used, she would definitely cure Mu Jin. Even if she really couldn't find a way to cure the poison, she would still find a way even if she had to pry open Yu Siqing's mouth. After all, as a doctor, she had too many ways to torture people. Normally, she disdained torturing others. No matter how disgusting someone she met, she would just give them a quick death. However, a person like Yu Siqing was clearly not worthy of such a death. Si Tuyen clenched his fists tightly. Although he had not seen it with his own eyes, from Bailey Hongzhuang's description, he could already imagine Mu Jin's current appearance. She was such an unforgettable woman back then, but now she had become like this because of him. How could he bear it? Bailey Hongzhuang and the others did not overlook Si Tuyen's emotions. In fact, Si Tuyen was the one who found it the hardest to accept the truth. "Grandpa, don't worry. Everything will be fine. Mother and I will try our best to convince grandmother. As long as grandmother is willing to let me treat her, I will definitely find a way to help her recover. As for those hateful people, they will be dealt with sooner or later. Father, don't worry. At least mother is still alive. This is already good news," Mu Lingbing hurriedly said. Compared to what they had expected, the current situation was much better. Even if the current situation was very bad, it was still very bad. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing's words, Si Tuyen's anger subsided slightly. However, it was still very strong. He did not speak and turned to walk into the room. Chapter 2173. Over the next few days, Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing stayed with Mu Jins. They didn't say much, only chatting with Mu Jins. Mu Jins had been alone for more than 10 years, and the appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang had undoubtedly made Mu Jins' mood a lot better. Si Tuyen, Lan Yunxiao, and Di Beichen stayed in their rooms to cultivate. Sun Moon Palace had never allowed outsiders to enter, so they didn't go anywhere else to avoid trouble. Now they could only place their hopes on Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Jins, hoping that they could persuade Mu Jins soon. However, Mu Jins' thoughts were already deeply rooted, so it wasn't easy to persuade her. Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing weren't anxious about this. In any case, it was the same no matter where they stayed. Under these circumstances, Bailey Hongzhuang found that Mu Jins' thoughts were gradually wavering. Perhaps it was because this trust was constantly deepening, so Mu Jins was gradually willing to open her heart and accept everything. 1 month later, under Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing's unrelenting efforts, Mu Jins finally agreed to let Bailey Hongzhuang treat her. After hearing this news, everyone's faces were filled with joy. As long as Mu Jins was willing to let them treat her, this was already the best news. On this day, Bailey Hongzhuang, Mu Lingbing, and Mu Jins were in the bedroom. "Mother, let Yixuan take a look at your condition," Mu Lingbing encouraged Mu Jins as she spoke slowly. Mu Jins nodded, but her eyes still flashed with a complicated light. In the end, this uncertain and complicated light finally turned into determination and decisiveness. Mu Jins removed the light muslin that had tightly wrapped around her body. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang had guessed, Mu Jins' exposed skin was completely charcoal black, dry and wrinkled like tree bark. It was extremely shocking. Mu Lingbing couldn't help but widen her eyes when she saw this. She knew that Mu Jinsei had been severely damaged, but the situation before her eyes had exceeded her expectations. She had never seen anyone become like this. After Bailey Hongzhuang saw Mu Jins' skin, her brows furrowed tightly. "Are you all frightened by me?" Mu Jinsei looked at Mu Lingbing's shocked expression and couldn't help but ask. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. "Grandma, it's okay. Take off your veil. I need to know more about your situation." "Mother, no matter what, your image in my heart has never changed," Mu Lingbing hurriedly added. When Mu Jinsei saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang did not show any signs of fear or disgust after seeing her current appearance, she relaxed a little and slowly removed her veil. Her face was also charred black. Other than her eyes, which were still bright, the rest of her face was unsightly. "Grandma, let me take your pulse." Mu Jins stretched out her hand, and Bailey Hongzhuang immediately began to take her pulse. Mu Jins' situation was really too shocking. Bailey Hongzhuang thought that she had been exposed to a lot of toxins, but compared to Mu Jins' situation, it was like a small child in front of a great witch. Chapter 2174. As she took Mu Jinsei's pulse, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but frown. She had never heard of such a poison before. Mu Jinsei's body wasn't affected at all, but her skin had turned into burnt bark. If anyone else saw Mu Jinsei's appearance, they wouldn't think that she was a living person, but a burnt tree. Grandmother, your insides aren't affected at all. It's just the surface, right? Bailey Hongzhuang asked. Mu Jinsei nodded. This bark-like skin will fall off, and every time it does, it's extremely painful. Skin will fall off? Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes changed. Skin could actually fall off. It was truly shocking. Grandmother, how many times have you shed your skin so far? Bailey Hongzhuang had never come into contact with this kind of poison before and could only understand it from her grandmother. Only then could she make an accurate judgment. Quite a few times, about once every 2 years. In the beginning, it was only my face that became like this. Later on, every time I shed my skin, the area would expand and eventually my entire body would become like this. I've tried not to shed my skin, but it's not something I can control. Mu Jinsei's expression was extremely ugly. She didn't know what Yu Siqing had done to her body. Since that was the case, why not let her die a quick death? Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Mu Lingbing couldn't help but look at each other. It looked like Yu Siqing really did find pleasure in torturing Mu Jinsei. Every 2 years, she would give Mu Jinsei another blow, immersing her in this kind of pain and watching her body slowly being eaten away. This was a situation that no one would be willing to accept. This Yu Siqing, she's really crazy. Mu Lingbing gritted her teeth. Yu Siqing didn't want Mu Jinsei's life. She wanted Mu Jinsei to suffer so much that she would rather die. Grandmother's entire body has already become like this. I wonder if she'll shed her skin again. Bailey Hongzhuang thought to herself. Grandmother, how long until the next time you shed your skin? There's still a month left. After Mu Jins decided to tell Bailey Hongzhuang everything, she did not hide anything. She told Bailey Hongzhuang everything that had happened in the past few years in great detail. However, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't figure out where the problem lay. She only took a bit of Mu Jins's blood. She needed to study it carefully. Grandma, let me take a look at your legs first. After understanding the specifics of the disfigurement, Bailey Hongzhuang changed her target to Mu Jins's leg. The former problem was obviously not something that could be solved in a short time. Mu Jinsei nodded slightly. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance, she knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was also helpless. However, she had already been disappointed many times. Moreover, this time, the other party was her own granddaughter. She knew that she would probably be like this for the rest of her life, so she didn't care. Mother, is there no one who can cure your leg? Mu Lingbing couldn't help but ask. Mu Jins nodded bitterly. Yu Siqing is a poison expert. She wants me to live like this for the rest of my life. Naturally, it's not something that an ordinary doctor can cure. Chapter 2175. Just as Mu Jinsei and Mu Lingbing were talking, Bailey Hongzhuang's voice suddenly rang out. This leg illness. I can cure it first. As Bailey Hongzhuang's words fell, Mu Jinsei and Mu Lingbing were stunned for a moment, then looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in astonishment. They hadn't expected Bailey Hongzhuang to have found a cure so quickly. Mu Jinsei looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in disbelief, thinking that she had heard wrongly. Back then, many famous doctors could only shake their heads and sigh when they saw her legs. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was now telling her that she could cure it so easily. Yi Xian, is what you said true? Mu Lingbing asked. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. The poison in this leg illness isn't complicated. Give me some time and I'll be able to concoct the antidote. However, grandmother's legs haven't moved for many years, so even after the poison is cured, it will take some time for them to fully recover. As for grandmother's skin condition, I've never seen any similar symptoms before, so I'll need some time to understand. After receiving Bailey Hongzhuang's confirmation, Mu Lingbing and Mu Jinsei's faces lit up with joy. No matter what, being able to solve a problem was extremely good news. Bailey Hongzhuang left the palace lord's hall after understanding all the information. She needed time to do some research. She believed that no matter how difficult the poison was to cure, as long as she understood the root cause, she would definitely be able to find a cure. Once Bailey Hongzhuang became serious, many people couldn't compare to her. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's departing figure, Mu Jinsei was still in disbelief. Can Yi Xian really do it? Even though she had heard from Mu Lingbing that Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills were outstanding, but hearing Bailey Hongzhuang say it so straightforwardly still gave her a feeling of disbelief. Although her skin couldn't recover, as long as she could walk again, it would be much more convenient. Mother, Yi Xian's medical skills are outstanding. As long as she says it can be cured, then it can definitely be cured. Let's wait for her good news. Mu Lingbing's clear eyes shone with excitement. Yi Xian's excellence had exceeded everyone's expectations. In order to convince Mu Jinsei, Mu Lingbing even told her about how Bailey Hongzhuang had poisoned the Yu clan. The Yu clan had suffered such a huge blow this time, was all thanks to Bailey Hongzhuang's efforts. Mu Jins was also dumbfounded after knowing all this. She knew how powerful Yu Xiqing's medical skills were, but she didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to be able to compare with her. Bailey Hongzhuang returned to her residence. When Di Beichen saw Bailey Hongzhuang return so early, he couldn't help but feel a little surprised. "Yu, you're back, why are you so?" Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. "I've already treated grandmother and came back to prepare some things." Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Si Tuyen and Lan Yunxiao quickly walked over. "Jinsei, she is willing to accept the treatment?" Si Tuyen forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked. "Grandmother has already been convinced by us. Then how are her injuries?" Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes darkened as she helplessly shook her head. "The situation is very complicated. It's not easy to cure her." Chapter 2176. After Bailey Hongzhuang had told Si Tuyen and the others about Mu Jin's situation, she returned to the house. Although they couldn't help but be worried when she told them this news, if she didn't say anything, they would be even more worried. Inside the house, Bailey Hongzhuang sat quietly in front of the desk, her delicate and elegant face filled with unconcealable worry. "Master, what are you worried about?" Xiao He rarely saw Bailey Hongzhuang so worried and couldn't help but ask. Xiao Bai and Baisher also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in confusion. Even if Mu Jin's poison was very difficult to remove, Master shouldn't have shown such an expression. One had to know that as long as there was no other way, Master would never give up hope. Skin shedding happens once every 2 years. Now that grandmother's skin has become like this, there are only 2 possibilities. One is that Master won't shed her skin anymore. As for the other, if there's a change, where do you think it will be? Hearing this, the 3 beasties were stunned for a moment before their eyes filled with fear. Could it be that it will turn inside her body? Xiaobai voiced out her guess. As soon as these words came out, the faces of the man and the 3 beasts turned ugly. Bailey Hongzhuang felt that with Yu Xiqing's level of viciousness, she wouldn't think in a good way. So, the first possibility was too small. There was only the second possibility. Since there was no way to spread it outside her body, she could only spread it inside her body. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't know what would happen if it spread inside her body, but she was sure that when it reached that stage, Mu Jins would definitely be in great pain. This was what she didn't want to see the most and what she was most worried about. There wasn't much time left before the next outbreak. If they couldn't find a solution in this period of time, she wouldn't be able to judge what they would have to endure next. At this moment, the 3 beasties completely understood that Master hadn't told the others about this situation. "Master, what will you do now?" Xiao Hei's face was filled with worry. However, in the current situation, they knew nothing about medicine and could not help at all. Their master could only bear all the pressure by herself. Bailey Hongzhuang's black eyes suddenly deepened, and then, A sharp light suddenly appeared, turning into an indomitable determination. Let's hurry up and research. We can only give it a try. Now they had no way out. They could only do their best to change everything. With regards to Mu Jinsei's leg disease, Yu Xiqing's method wasn't too complicated. Bailey Hongzhuang only needed to understand the ingredients, and she would be able to make it. The next day, Bailey Hongzhuang had already concocted the antidote. The detoxification process was not complicated, and Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the house after handing the antidote to Mu Lingbing. It could be said that she was racing against time and was unwilling to waste any time. Mu Lingbing seemed to have sensed that Bailey Hongzhuang's mood was different from usual. Although she was puzzled, she didn't ask too much. Bailey Hongzhuang always had her own ideas. Since she couldn't help Bailey Hongzhuang in this aspect, she could only leave Bailey Hongzhuang alone. Chapter 2177. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang had tried her best to research it and flipped through many medical books, she still couldn't find any relevant records. As the 1-month deadline drew closer, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but feel anxious. If it was any other day, she would definitely be very interested in researching a poison she had never seen before. But with the current situation, she couldn't treat it as a test or a game. In this period of time, Bailey Hongzhuang had only discovered that Mu Jins's blood was very special and mixed with some special substances. However, these substances weren't poisonous. Similarly, she couldn't find anything special in Mu Jins's skin. It was like a piece of real tree bark and was made of human tissue and tree bark. As for the poison, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't find it at all. She was helpless. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang was also helpless. This kind of feeling made one feel especially hopeless. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the moonlight outside the window. Tomorrow was the 1-month deadline, but she hadn't found anything. The three beasties quietly stayed by Bailey Hongzhuang's side. They could all understand Bailey Hongzhuang's complicated feelings. Usually, no matter what kind of illness it was, as long as Master took action, the illness would immediately be cured. But now, the person Master cared about was in such a state and Master was helpless. It could be seen how terrible Master's mood was. For the entire night, Bailey Hongzhuang sat like this until dawn. She couldn't think of anything. Yixuan, something happened to grandmother. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was about to go check on Mu Jins's condition, Mu Lingbing ran over in a panic. Originally, Bailey Hongzhuang had hoped that this kind of situation wouldn't happen again, but reality told her that it was impossible. Mu Lingbing's shout attracted everyone's attention and they all ran out of their rooms, their faces full of worry and anxiety. What happened? Lan Yunxiao hurriedly asked. When Bailey Hongzhuang heard Mu Lingbing's words, she didn't care about anything else and quickly ran in the direction she had personally chosen. Mu Lingbing's words had already told her too much. She was afraid that it was as she had expected. Mu Jins's skin shedding this time was different from before. When Bailey Hongzhuang arrived at the bedchamber, she saw Mu Jins struggling on the ground with a face full of pain. The intense pain made her face pale and veins popped out on her temples. She was in extreme pain. Mu Jinsei had been enduring immense pain all these years, and she was able to endure normal pain. But even so, Mu Jinsei was still in such pain. It could be seen how terrifying the pain she was enduring was. The next second, Bailey Hongzhuang noticed that Mu Jins had started to vomit blood. The blood was all black, and not a single trace of red could be seen. "Grandmother, where does it hurt?" Bailey Hongzhuang quickly asked. Inside my body, ah!" Mu Jinsei let out a blood-curdling scream as she frantically rolled on the ground. That kind of pain almost caused her to collapse. When Si Tuyen and the others rushed into the bedchamber, they saw this scene. Si Tuyen looked at Mu Jins, who was suffering like charcoal. His face was full of shock and pain. He had already understood the situation from Bailey Hongzhuang, but when he saw it with his own eyes, he still had an indescribable impact. Chapter 2178. Lan Yunxiao and Di Beichen also received a huge shock. This kind of situation was simply unheard of. "I can't take it, ah!" Blood-curdling screams kept coming out of Mu Jin's mouth. In this kind of situation, she really felt that death was better than living. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Mu Jin's state, she hastily said, "Grandfather, hold grandmother down. You absolutely can't let her seek death." This kind of pain was clearly not something Mu Jin could endure. She already wanted to die. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Situ Yen immediately reacted. He absolutely couldn't let Mu Jin die like this. In the next instant, Situ Yen tightly hugged Mu Jin, preventing her from seeking death. Mu Jin's consciousness had already been obliterated by the pain. She didn't know who was hugging her. She could only frantically struggle, wanting to end her own life. Bailey Hongzhuang swiftly grabbed Mu Jin's hand. She had to understand Mu Jin's current situation. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang had guessed, this dark transformation had already spread to Mu Jin's body. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before Mu Jin completely lost her life. When Lan Yunxiao and the rest saw Mu Jin like this, they didn't know what to say. Even if Mu Jin had stolen Yu Siqing's sweetheart, Yu Siqing's actions were too vicious. Normal people wouldn't be able to do such a cruel thing. Bailey Hongzhuang swiftly took out silver needles and pierced them into Mu Jin's acupuncture point. Miserable screams spread throughout the bedchamber. Di Beichen, Lan Yunxiao, and Mu Lingbing were all helping Bailey Hongzhuang to hold down Mu Jin's body, preventing her from struggling. Seeing Mu Jin in such pain, their hearts were bleeding. However, they couldn't accept Mu Jin's leaving them like this. When Bailey Hongzhuang finished her acupuncture, the struggling Mu Jin finally calmed down. However, she had already fainted. "Yishuan, what's going on?" Mu Lingbing hastily asked. Situ Yen and the rest focused their gazes on Bailey Hongzhuang. They never thought that Mu Jin's condition would be this serious. Bailey Hongzhuang told Situ Yen and the rest her previous judgment. Now that things had developed to this stage, there was no point in hiding it. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone was stunned. "Right now, I'm only using acupuncture to temporarily control the spread of the poison. But this is only a delaying tactic. Of course, if we can't find a solution within this period of time, grandmother is very likely to die." Calm. Of the bedchamber. Everyone stared blankly at the unconscious Mu Jin. They were unable to accept such an outcome. Situ Yen hugged Mu Jin tightly. After waiting for so many years, he finally got to see Mu Jin again. How could he watch her leave him like this? "Yishuan, is there no other way?" Mu Lingbing's face was ashen. She looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a glimmer of hope. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. "Not at the moment." She turned to look at Mu Jin. She never thought that the poison would be so terrifying. But at that moment, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly noticed a faint red light between Mu Jin's eyebrows. Chapter 2179. Could it be? Bailey Hongzhuang's clear eyes flashed with shock. She had never thought of this possibility before, but from Mu Jin's current situation, there was only one possibility. Si Tuyen and the rest looked at Mu Jin with worry, their hearts in a mess. At this moment, when they suddenly heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words, everyone's eyes fell on her. "Yishuan, do you know something?" Mu Lingbing quickly grabbed Bailey Hongzhuang's hand, her face filled with anxiety. "Gu poison." Bailey Hongzhuang muttered these two words, but it made Si Tuyen and the rest's expressions change. "Gu poison?" Si Tuyen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in shock. Gu poison was rarely seen, and it was sinister and vicious. Just hearing its name was enough to make people shrink back. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. "I just saw a trace of gu poison in grandmother's forehead. It had never appeared before, so I didn't think in that direction." For the past few days, Bailey Hongzhuang had always thought that Mu Jin's current state was caused by poison. However, she couldn't find any poison that matched Mu Jin's condition. Now that she linked it to gu poison, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but come to a realization. If it was goo poison, then everything made sense. Goo poison is a sinister move that has long been banned. Back then, the witchcraft clan was directly exterminated. It's been many years since goo poison appeared in the Shengxian continent. Lan Yunxiao said with a solemn expression. The goo poison was too insidious, and its methods were extremely cruel. Back then, the witchcraft clan committed crimes in the Shengxian continent and was exterminated. Since then, goo poison had disappeared from everyone's sight. They never thought that Yu Siqing would poison Mu Jin's, but now that they thought about it, they felt that other than goo poison, there was nothing else that could cause Mu Jin's to be in such pain. Hongzhuang, if it's goo poison, then do you have a way to cure it? Si Tian and the rest's expressions turned ugly. Goo poison had disappeared for too many years, so many doctors didn't have much understanding of it. They only had a few records in ancient books. Based on those records alone, it was obviously impossible to cure the goo poison. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang was so young, so she probably hadn't come into contact with goo poison. At this moment, it wasn't easy to determine that Mu Jin's had been poisoned, let alone cure it. Di Beichen's gaze focused on Bailey Hongzhuang. He knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was special, but he didn't know if Bailey Hongzhuang had any understanding of this. Let's see what kind of goo poison it is. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes darkened, but she didn't say anything else. There were many kinds. Were there different kinds of goo poison? In her previous life, when she was still alive, the goo poison was a very frightening poison. The witchcraft clan could always use goo poison to control others or make people die without knowing why, without leaving a trace. After she transmigrated, she found out that the witchcraft clan had been exterminated, so she never thought about this. She didn't expect Yu Siqing to be able to do this. She had underestimated Yu Siqing. Bailey Hongzhuang sat by Mu Jin's side and put away her silver needles. Chapter 2180. Following that, Bailey Hongzhuang pierced the silver needles into different acupuncture points on Mu Jin's body. Si Tuyen and the rest quietly watched Bailey Hongzhuang's actions. They didn't know what Bailey Hongzhuang was going to do. After Bailey Hongzhuang pierced the silver needles into Mu Jin's acupuncture points, the silver needles started to vibrate. Seeing this scene, a wisp of surprise appeared in everyone's eyes. However, Si Tuyen and the rest were all experienced and knowledgeable people, so they quickly knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was using the vibrating needle technique. In that instant, they completely understood the power of Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills. Previously, they might not have had a direct understanding of this, but now they completely understood. With the trembling of these silver needles, Bailey Hongzhuang's forehead was also oozing fine beads of sweat. In the next moment, under everyone's shocked and astonished gazes, they saw Mu Jin's body start to move. In her meridians there was a protruding thing that kept moving forward. Seeing this, everyone immediately knew that this was a goo worm. In the past, everyone had only heard of goo worms, but seeing it with their own eyes was still extremely shocking. This thing had actually been hiding in Mu Jin's body for so many years. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang also confirmed her judgment. This was a goo worm. Under the pressure of Bailey Hongzhuang's silver needles, the goo worm arrived at Mu Jin's wrist. Hongzhuang, can this drive the goo worm out? Si Tuyen hurriedly asked. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. No, I'm only forcing the goo worm's form out. After understanding it, I can think of a solution. Goo poisons are extremely complicated, and Yu Siqing is sinister and vicious. Who knows, this goo worm might even have a mother worm. If that's really the case, then Yu Siqing has been relying on this to control grandmother's life and death. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's explanation, everyone's faces turned ugly. They simply couldn't imagine that Yu Siqing was actually so vicious. The goo worm had been moving around Mu Jin's wrist. This goo worm had been living in Mu Jin's body for too long and was almost the size of a fist. At this moment, it was like a tumor. Bailey Hongzhuang took out her silver needles. She was only using this method to force the goo worm to this place. But once she cut Mu Jinsei's hand, the goo worm wouldn't come out. Instead, it would quickly hide inside Mu Jinsei's body. If she wanted to find it again, it would take a lot of effort. Bailey Hongzhuang stabbed the goo worm. She had to extract some of the goo worm's body fluid. Only then would she be able to find out what kind of substances could restrain the goo worm's bodies was. Si Tuyen and the rest looked at Bailey Hongzhuang's actions. They, who didn't know anything about medicine, could only place their hopes on Bailey Hongzhuang. As Bailey Hongzhuang's silver needles pierced into the goo worm's body, the goo worm immediately started to struggle. It twisted and turned, wanting to leave this place. After extracting some of the goo worm's body fluid, Bailey Hongzhuang then kept her silver needles. When Bailey Hongzhuang kept the silver needles in Mu Jinsei's body one by one, the goo worm disappeared into nothingness under everyone's shocked gazes. It merged into Mu Jinsei's body as if it had never appeared. Chapter 2181. Yixuan, how is your grandmother now? Mu Lingbing asked anxiously. Bailey Hongzhuang lowered her head to look at the unconscious Mu Jinsei. Her expression was also filled with worry as she said, I've already temporarily controlled the goo poison in grandmother's body. She's just fainted from exhaustion. Once she wakes up, she'll be fine for now. However, that goo worm has been absorbing nutrients from grandmother's body all these years. Take good care of grandmother, I'll go study this goo worm. All right. Everyone nodded. None of them expected Mu Jinsei's condition to be this bad. In comparison, if Mu Jinsei was only disfigured, then it wasn't that serious. But now, they really didn't know what to do. Si Tuyen looked at Mu Jinsei with heartache. His stupidity had caused Mu Jinsei to fall to this state. When he saw Mu Jinsei struggling like she was better off dead, his heart ached to the extreme. He slowly carried Mu Jinsei to the bed. He was so careful that it was as if he was carrying a rare treasure. Even though Mu Jinsei's skin had become like this, he could still recognize that the person in front of him was the Mu Jinsei he had been thinking about day and night. Everyone's expression changed when they saw Si Tuyen's expression. They already knew about Si Tuyen's feelings for Mu Jinsei. Now that they saw it, their feelings deepened. In reality, no matter who saw Mu Jinsei's current appearance, they would be extremely shocked and even terrified. Even though Lan Yunxiao and Di Beichen were prepared, they still found it hard to accept when they first saw it. However, Si Tuyen used his actions to tell them what true feelings were. When Mu Lingbing saw this scene, her heart was comforted. These days, she and Mu Jinsei had talked about many things. Mu Jinsei was filled with hatred towards Si Tuyen. Back then, when Mu Jinsei left by herself, she was even more worried than before. However, after Yusicheng hurt Mu Lingbing and Bailey Hongzhuang, Mu Jinsei's feelings towards Si Tuyen had turned into hatred. Because of Si Tuyen's mistake, she had hurt the people she cared about the most. This was something she couldn't accept. Now, Mu Lingbing only hoped that Mu Jinsei would recover quickly. She believed that as long as Mu Jinsei knew what Si Tuyen had done all these years, she would definitely forgive him. Mu Lingbing, Lan Yunxiao, and Di Beichen exchanged glances before leaving the room. At this time, it was enough for Si Tuyen to take care of Mu Jinsei. Right now, Si Tuyen only had the opportunity to take care of Mu Jinsei while she was unconscious. After Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the house, she began to research. She had been puzzled before, but now she finally found a direction. After understanding what it was, at least he had a target to study. When Mu Lingbing and the other two returned, they saw Bailey Hongzhuang's tightly shut door. They wanted to know more about the poison. However, this was not the time to disturb Bailey Hongzhuang. Thinking about it, Bailey Hongzhuang was more anxious than them. In the next few days, Di Beichen only sent food to Bailey Hongzhuang's house regularly. At other times, they didn't see Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 2182. Si Tuyen had been taking care of Mu Jinsei the entire time. This time, Mu Jinsei had been unconscious for a long time, but her body's condition was very stable. Because the goo worm was affecting Mu Jinsei's insides this time, the deficit was even more alarming. 5 days later, Mu Jinsei slowly woke up. When Si Tuyen saw that Mu Jinsei was showing signs of waking up, he quickly left the palace and left Mu Lingbing to take care of Mu Jinsei. Mu Jinsei's body was already extremely weak. If she saw him, she would probably go even more hysterical. He couldn't take such a risk and let Mu Jinsei's condition worsen. When Mu Jinsei woke up, she saw a familiar figure disappear from her sight. But when the thought of it being Si Tuyen appeared in her mind, even she found it laughable. She had actually dreamed of the man who had ruined her life. What a joke! Mother, how are you feeling? Mu Lingbing couldn't help but rejoice when she saw that Mu Jinsei had woken up. Mu Jinsei hadn't woken up for several days and she had been worried to death. Mu Jinsei's face was pale as she shook her head. What happened to me afterwards? Mu Lingbing poured a cup of water for Mu Jinsei before telling her what had happened that day. Of course, she didn't mention Si Tuyen and the others. You're saying that I've been poisoned by a goo worm? Mu Jinsei's eyes were filled with shock. She had never thought that she had been poisoned by such a terrifying goo worm. That's right. Hong Zhuang used silver needles to force the goo worm out of your body. That's how we saw the goo worm's existence. However, it's not an easy task to force the goo worm out of the body. Hong Zhuang has been trying to think of a way recently. Mu Lingbing slowly explained. You Siqing actually used a goo worm on me. Mu Jinsei's voice was filled with disbelief. She had never thought that this would be the result. No wonder so many doctors had never seen this kind of symptoms. Goo worm was something that had disappeared for many years. It looked like Yu Siqing had really gone to great lengths to torment her. She had even managed to find such a thing. I didn't think that Yi Xian could even diagnose a goo worm. Truly incredible. Mu Jinsei couldn't help sighing. Previously, Hong Zhuang had already healed her legs, which made her extremely surprised. Although the way she walked was still somewhat unchanged, as long as she was given a little more time, she would be able to completely recover. She couldn't help but marvel at Bailey Hongzhuang's medical skills. Back then, so many doctors came, but none of them could cure her legs. Just this point alone was enough to prove it. She had been poisoned by goo. Other doctors were unable to tell, but Bailey Hongzhuang was able to tell. It was really amazing. My goo poison was suppressed by Yi Xian? Mu Jinsei asked. Mu Lingbing nodded slightly. Yi Xuan has only temporarily suppressed the outbreak of the goo poison. She said she wants to use this time to find a solution. Hearing this, Mu Jinsei's expression changed a little. Although Mu Lingbing had only said this much, she already understood. In the past, when the goo poison acted up, although the pain was unbearable, it was far less intense and terrifying than this time. If Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't find a solution in this time, then she wouldn't have long to live. This wasn't something she wanted to see, but to be able to see Mu Lingbing and Lan Yixuan in this lifetime was already a blessing to her. Chapter 2183. Lingbing, tell Yixuan not to feel too much pressure. To be able to see all of you return safely while I'm still alive is already the greatest blessing I've ever had. Mu Jin stared at Mu Lingbing's familiar face and reached out to hold the latter's hand. No matter what, at least when her life was about to end, she would not be alone. If one were to say that she hated Si Tuyen to the core, then there was only one thing she was grateful for. Because without Si Tuyen, she would not have been able to have Mu Lingbing and Lan Yixuan. To her, this was enough. Her life in this world had not been in vain. Hearing Mu Jin's pessimistic words, Mu Lingbing's eyes darkened and her lips trembled. She did not wish for Mu Jin's to give up hope like this, but the goo poison was too powerful and she could not guarantee that she would be able to get rid of it. Over the past few days, Bailey Hongzhuang had been immersed in her research and had not rested at all. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang in this state, she could not help but feel her heart ache. In the long run, Bailey Hongzhuang's body would not be able to take it. But now, Mu Jin's life was at stake, and she had no way of stopping Bailey Hongzhuang. All of them were in this state of mind, and their emotions were extremely complicated. Originally, they had wanted to capture Yu Siqing alive. Perhaps after capturing her, they would be able to save Mu Jin's. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and Si Tuyen had told them the truth, and they had given up on this plan. There must be a mother worm in Mu Jin's body, and this mother worm must be in Yu Siqing's hands. Based on Yu Siqing's deranged behavior, she would not give them the chance to save Mu Jin's. Perhaps to Yu Siqing herself, she did not fear death. She had been no different from a zombie these days, and she only wanted to see everyone suffer. Once they went to find Yu Siqing, she would definitely take Mu Jin's life. This would only make things worse. Si Tuyen nodded in agreement after hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's analysis. He had interacted with Yu Siqing for so many years and understood her very well. Bailey Hongzhuang researched day and night, and in the process of this research, Bailey Hongzhuang also had some gains. This goo worm lived on trees, so Mu Jinsei's skin had the appearance of tree bark. It sucked the nutrients from Mu Jinsei's body while secreting the components of the tree. Under this imperceptible influence, Mu Jin's would become a dead tree in the future. Bailey Hongzhuang had high attainments in medical skills. As long as she was given enough time, she would be able to decipher everything. Now, what she needed to do was to develop a drug that could stop the goo worm from continuing to grow and suppress its secretion in Mu Jinsei's body. Moreover, she wanted to completely sever the connection between the mother insect and the child insect without the mother insect knowing. Once the connection was broken, it had to be completed in an extremely short period of time. Otherwise, once Yu Siqing discovered that something was wrong with the mother insect, she would immediately give the order to the mother insect and let the child insect take Mu Jin's life in an instant. Bailey Hongzhuang had interacted with the witchcraft clan in her past life, so she was very clear about their method. Now, the most important thing was to understand what ingredients could suppress the growth of the child insect.